Joining me now with the latest on what is happening in Iraq is an Iraqi war veteran himself. He's a representative of the 4th Congressional District of Arkansas, Congressman Tom Cotton. Congressman, welcome to Washington Watch.
Hi, Tony. It's great to be on with you as always. Great to see you earlier today in the hearing in front of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on African and Global Health about religious freedom. And thank you for all that you do on behalf of religious freedom here in the United States and everywhere around the world.
Well, I appreciate that. And honestly, when I saw you on the committee and heard your testimony, I didn't know at that time that you were going to be on the radio program because when I left this afternoon, we weren't certain who was going to be on. But your comments today on that committee regarding the loss of religious freedom and the hostility and the persecution that's taking place in Iraq is something you know a little bit about. You saw it firsthand as you walked in this part of the world. That's
right. I'm actually not on that subcommittee, but I feel very passionate about Meriam Ibrahim's situation in Sudan. In fact, I've introduced a so-called private bill, a relatively obscure technique of Congress to grant citizenship to someone, which I think the Congress should proceed in doing to eliminate any qualms that the Sudanese government might have, or the State Department might have. But as I mentioned at the hearing, I was in Iraq in 2006 as a leader with the 101st Airborne in Baghdad, and we saw firsthand churches being defaced, Christian churches being defaced, and Christians being persecuted and ethnically cleansed out of Baghdad neighborhoods, just as we unfortunately see today in all of Mosul, Christians being driven out of the city, being told that they have a choice to convert to Islam and repudiate Jesus Christ or face certain death. And that's a city, it's an ancient city of Nineveh, where Christians have been worshiping Jesus Christ since essentially the days of his life. And I think this is a terrible tragedy that's a result of the president's failed policies in Iraq, but also just a reminder of how perilous many Christians around the world face their day-to-day life.
I want to talk about what's happening there in Mosul and other parts where we're seeing them march across, killing Christians, running them out. But I want to ask you this. It's kind of more of a personal question. I hope you don't mind me asking. But sure. As a veteran of the war in Iraq, as you went in and you saw the sacrifices that we made to liberate those people, to give them freedom like we have, how do you feel today when you see this administration that is just basically absent and we see the Middle East imploding?
Well, Tony, I feel frustrated. I feel sad, but I can't say that I feel surprised. This is something that I and so many others predicted in 2011 when the president made his rash decision to withdraw the final troops from Iraq. Again, the generals in charge at the time did not request a lot of troops. They didn't request trigger pullers on the front lines. They requested trainers and planners that would continue to provide a degree of professionalism to the Iraqi security forces, continue to put some kind of mentorship in place for Nouri al-Maliki, who is certainly a difficult world leader with him to deal, but that's a core part of the presidency. And it would also send a signal to our enemies like Iran and al-Qaeda that we took seriously the sacrifices we had made in Iraq and that we weren't just going to surrender the gains and really the victory that we had achieved by 2011. So I'm deeply frustrated, disappointed, saddened by it, but I can't say, unfortunately, that I'm surprised by it.
You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins, joined by Congressman Tom Cotton of the 4th Congressional District of Arkansas. He himself is a veteran of the Army. He was an Iraq war veteran. Congressman, let's talk now about what's happening there today. What should the United States be doing at this present time? Because there's several issues here at stake. The religious liberty not being one of the smaller ones. It's a major issue, but also this is destabilizing for the entire region and a threat not just to America but to many of those surrounding countries.
That's right, Tom. It's very destabilizing. It's hard to believe, but just 3 years after America was in Iraq, our two worst enemies in the world now have more influence there than do we. Not just one, but two, Iran and al-Qaeda. Specifically in Mosul, I think the best thing that we could do is work with the Kurdish regional government. They have been in charge of northern Iraq now for a couple of decades, and they frankly have more authority on the ground in northern Iraq in places like Mosul than does the central government of Nur al-Maliki. But we have to insist that Nur al-Maliki returns to the kind of leader that he was in the days after the surge. He was not a sectarian leader. Once we put new generalship and a new strategy and more troops on the ground, he began to reconcile with Sunni Muslims in the west and the north, and he brought together a government that was largely pluralistic and representative and peaceful. That was a direct result of the American blood that was shed in Iraq and the leadership of our senior generals and diplomats on the ground. President Obama has squandered that, but he's got to re-engage with Nur al-Maliki and try to recreate that kind of reconciliation between the various sects in Iraq. Again, Nur al-Maliki is a difficult leader with whom to deal, but part of the core responsibility of our president is to manage our relationship with those kind of leaders around the world to ensure that we're protecting America's national security interests.
Are we doing anything as a nation right now to help the Kurds and those in that region that could be a buffer to this Islamic State?
Well, I don't think we're doing enough. You heard Frank Wolf today, the great congressman from Virginia who has been a champion of religious freedom at home and abroad for decades in the Congress. We joined the letter, several congressmen and I joined the letter that Frank had written to the Department of State a few weeks ago to urge this very solution, to try to help work with the Kurds to establish some protective zones and other measures to ensure that Christians wouldn't be slaughtered or wouldn't be ethnically cleansed or face genocide in the areas of Iraq that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria is undertaking. But again, I just think that the President and the State Department is moving too slowly. Our enemies around the world, be they ISIS or Vladimir Putin or Iran, realizes that our president is going to be slow to react if he reacts at all, and therefore they can change the facts on the ground. Sometimes that means shooting down an airliner full of innocent civilians, to include children in Iraq or in Ukraine. Sometimes that means driving Christians out of a city like Mosul, where they have been worshiping Christ for almost as long as Christianity has been a religion.
Well, it's when you look at what's happening around the world on our southern border, as we were just talking about a few moments ago, with the southern another fellow member of the Arkansas community, Ronnie Floyd. Dr. Floyd was talking about his trip to the border of southern Texas yesterday, and we look at what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, we have an administration that just appears to be completely absent when it comes to the crisis we're facing today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very peculiar form of crisis management, Tony, that seems to create one worse crisis to get the last crisis off of the newspaper headlines.
You're
when
right.
You went from the IRS scandal to the VA to the Bo Bergdahl prisoner swap to the Islamic State taking over in Iraq to a civilian airliner being shot out of the skies in Ukraine. It's hard to imagine they're going to keep this up or what that would mean for Americans' national security interests in the world.
Yeah. All right, Congressman Tom Cotton, thanks so much for being with us. Thank you for your continued service to our country.
Well, thanks very much, Tony. I appreciate that.